Warm congratulations in acquiring your new role. We wish you all the best, and I think all of us would like to pay tribute to your predecessor, David Mundell, who was a good friend of this committee, and we hope that you will be a regular visitor and attender at our sessions, and I know that you'll be following our work very keenly. Perhaps for the record, if you could introduce who is with you, and is there anything by way of a short introductory statement? Secretary of State.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do both. And I am pleased to appear in front of the committee today. I learned in my career in business before coming to this place almost just over 2 years ago that the way to get on in life and succeed is to have the best people around you, and today I've got that. So I have the Director of the Office, Gillian McGregor, the Director of the Scotland Office, and Robin Walker, who's Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And as you mentioned, David Mundell, I would just like to be mindful of his last words to the committee when he was asked if there was to be a successor to him at his last appearance, what his advice might be to that successor. And he said, always take the Scottish Affairs Select Committee very seriously.
Advice. Very good advice.
And I'm going to do just that, which is why I'm slightly out of breath, having beaten the crowds to get here. And I also want to just put on record my thanks to David for all that he did as Secretary of State for Scotland, and also before that as Under Secretary of State for Scotland. I think he put in 9 years of very, very hard work. If I could just say a few words, as you kindly invited me to. In my first few months in the role, and also from my time as a government whip before that, I've seen the valuable role that these select committees play in Parliament and in scrutinising the work of government and also raising the profile of important issues. I've also seen the constructive way in which you help inform government policy and decision-making, and we've paid some attention, obviously, to the reports that you've recently produced. Turning to today's session, I think understandably you might be interested in my priorities and how the Scotland Office operates and the work we've been involved in the EU negotiations and in securing preparations if we had to exit without a deal. And I just say my priorities have been clear from day one. They're to deliver Brexit on the best possible terms for Scotland and the rest of the UK, to defend the Union against those who would want to tear it apart, and to help grow Scotland's economy, which, I'm sorry to say, still continues to lag behind that of the rest of the UK. And I think the Scotland Office has played a key role in this work. For example, my ministerial team have been engaged in a range of EU exit operation meetings. Refer to the EXO committee, and I'll refer to that as we go on through the session, if that's okay. And that's looking at key issues around preparedness. But it's not just that. We've also been working constructively with the Scottish Government on those preparedness issues. And I just say finally, because I'm conscious I have to go to Cabinet, so I've shortened my opening remarks somewhat, but I've just say I've been very impressed in the first few weeks that I've been in this role by the breadth of work that this office does. And it's not just on the EU exit preparedness, which I've been talking about, but just a whole range of policy areas like the City and Growth deals. And as we prepare to leave the EU, Chairman, I just say my ministerial team and I and the office will continue to work tirelessly to represent Scotland's best interest in Whitehall.
Grateful, and thank you for your brevity. We do understand that you have to get to Cabinet at 2:30, and we have you to 1:15, so we'll try to be as concise as possible with our questions, and I'm sure we'll have that in response from you and your team. And you're absolutely right, these are the themes that we wish to talk to you about. We might want to probe you in a bit more detail at a subsequent date about some of the issues, but we'll see what we could do this with the hour that's available to us just now. Could I just start with, like, obviously you're new to the post, so you'll have your own very distinct ideas about what the role entails and involves, and you'll have your own particular agenda. Maybe you could start by telling us what that might be with reference to our latest report, the Intergovernment Relations report that we just concluded, which was warmly accepted and received by the Scotland Office and by Government, and particularly what we said about the role of the Scotland Office and the Secretary of State, where we proposed and suggested a proper review of your office, with a suggestion that maybe the territorial Secretary of States and offices could be merged into one distinct department, a Department of Constitutional Affairs or Relations. I want to know what your view of that is, what you believe the role of the Scotland Office is, and does it have a useful future as part of the firmament in Whitehall?
So, I believe it has a strong future. I mean, clearly, strengthening, sustaining the union is important. Being Scotland's voice in Whitehall is another key issue. Championing the work that the UK government does in Scotland, that's also important, very important. And we believe that our responsibility here is to use the levers available to us to create, opportunities, jobs, long-term growth in Scotland. And obviously the current thing is through the city and growth deals that we're undertaking, the 1.4 billion of investment. And I think that builds on the good work that David did going before. I think that the office, it's important that Scotland is represented in Whitehall, and I would be surprised if anyone thought that was a bad idea.
Yes,
if I may, just to follow on that, having come from another department where I had devolution responsibilities, but it was a cross-UK department, one of the things that has struck me in joining the Scotland office is the amount of expertise specific to Scotland that sits within the Scotland office, and likewise the Northern Ireland office. And actually that, of course, the devolution settlements are different. Many of the issues affecting each territory and nation are different. And I think there is a real value in having those separate voices reflected around the cabinet table by separate departments. So I can see where the recommendation came from the department, but I think certainly from my experience of government to date, I have seen there's real value in having the distinct voices of each of the nations and territories represented and able to make the case both in cross-government level and in cabinet committees.
Maybe we could get onto this just now, which is obviously the review by Andrew Dunlop, and I'm presuming that the government are still committed to this review, because I think one of the remits of Andrew's review would be look at some of our suggestions and recommendations. Are you saying, therefore, that the review of the Scotland office is now not going to be discussed and looked at, or are you still committed to having that review?
So I've met with Lord Dunlop. And I've pushed Scotland's interests, obviously, in the review, but I know that he's met many other stakeholders and interested parties. And his review is across the whole of the United Kingdom. It's all four parts of the United Kingdom, if you like, that he's reviewing. It's not just about, some people talk to me in terms of it just being Scotland's, he's reviewing how Scotland operates within Whitehall and vice versa. He's not. He's looking at the whole panoply of issues that run across, whether into Northern Ireland or Wales or indeed England. And I won't talk specifically about what I discussed with him. Obviously, I was pressing a strong case for Scotland, as you can imagine. He was in listening mode. He didn't give me any strong opinions one way or another. He is going to publish his review before the end of November, and I think that we shouldn't sort of prejudge that in any way, but we will pay attention to the outcomes when they come.
I think we'll probably want a conversation with Lord Dunlop as the review either concludes or he's in the process of making his recommendations.
Yeah.
But we spoke to the previous Secretary of State about the Dunlop review and the remit of this, and you've twice already talked about strengthening the union, which you've every right to do, and obviously that's a function that you see as valuable to the Scotland office. Part of the Dunlop review so far, what seems to be happening, looks like very much a branding exercise. Is that something that we should expect more of? I heard you talk the other day about having a union holiday, then we should dispense with one of these pernicious left-wing holidays. I was thinking, what's Christmas ever done to the new Secretary of State? Is that the sort of thing that you're going to start to get into? Should we expect to see a lot more made in the UK and Union Jacks everywhere?
Well, I think of changing my middle name to Union, yes. No, I would add that that's also a glib remark, as was the removing one of the left-wing bank holidays and replacing it with a Union Day. I mean, that was, if you remember, I also made a number of remarks that day. It was a panel for the Union at the party conference. There was humour attached.
So we're not going to get a day where we could all get Union Jacks out.
Union Day has different meanings in different parts of the United Kingdom. So it was, as I say, just a glib remark. As regards the Dunlop review, I think he's not looking at specifically at bank holidays or anything like that. He's looking at the machinery of government and how it best serves the union.
But could you just maybe just lastly from me, because I know we've got very, very short time, just give us a sort of sense of what other things that review will be looking at? Is it going to be, obviously, intergovernmental machinery is a big feature of that. beyond that, what sort of things should we expect to see?
Well, I'm not being difficult in saying this. It's an independent review, and it really is. I mean, I do think it'd be very helpful for you to speak to him on that. And I think that's a fair answer. I think I'd be straying into a territory and possibly giving you the wrong information, because the truth is, in the detail he's going to come out with and the areas where he focuses his importance, at this stage, I don't know.
Grateful. Right, we've got a couple of stuff to mention before we do move on. Firstly, John Lamont, did you rock and then Paul Massey? John.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations on your appointment. Two very quick questions in respect of your department's work programme and the activity you're doing just now. I mean, currently we are engaged in this, or the EU and the US are engaged in this tariff war, which is affecting a number of Scottish iconic industries, particularly whisky and textiles, which affects my own constituency quite badly.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could just update us on the department's work and the government's work in trying to solve that.
So you're absolutely right. It is a matter that's very serious to us, and we recognise the 18th of October as approaching fast, which is the proposed date at the moment for these tariffs. This is it's worth remembering this is a dispute between Boeing and Airbus, and it's been, I think it started in 2004 or thereabouts. It is very much an EU negotiation with the USA. It is disappointing to me that malt whisky has been carved out for that, particularly because they've even carved out malt whisky in Northern Ireland, but not Southern Ireland. And of the initial proposed industries that would be hit, a number of the French managed to remove cognac and champagne, the Italians removed their wine, the British government didn't get anything removed. Now that may say a lot about the state of negotiations between us and the EU at the moment, or the state of play. It also says that when we leave the EU, finally leave the EU, we can bourbon is the issue, and if we weren't putting tariffs against bourbon, then we wouldn't have tariffs against malt whisky. Why do I know that? Because I met with the American ambassador on Monday, and we had a conversation, and he pointed out that whisky and bourbon were part of the disagreement. As regards the government's activity, which is, we have raised the matter with, I've seen a transcript of a conversation between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States. We have raised the matter, not only, I've written to Number 10, but it's also been raised with the Department for International Trade, and I've written to the American ambassador, Woody Johnston, and I've subsequently had a discussion with him about it.
Okay, and then related to that, and then moving on.
And I must apologise. Textiles and biscuits were also in the letters I wrote. Just to be clear, I know textiles is particularly important to you.
Right. Yeah. With the budget coming up, and then just come back to whisky, in previous budgets, the Scottish Conservatives have been very successful in persuading the Chancellor to freeze duty on whisky. Can you reassure me that you'll be doing everything to back up those of us in the backbenches and trying to persuade the Chancellor again that whisky duty should be frozen in the budget again?
Absolutely. So our budget ask from, I think your budget ask is the same as my budget ask, which is absolute that whisky tariffs duties should be frozen.
Thank you. Deirdre Brock.
Secretary of State, welcome to your new role. I wanted to ask about something I've asked about for some time now, social media and communications from the Scotland office, because of course we've noticed that there's been a 655% increase since 2010 in your communications costs on the team, and we had a 15% increase since 2017-18, so that's nearly £100,000.
Right.
Since 2017-2018. Could you just run us through the reason for that increase? Given the concerns that have been raised in the past.
So I would say that the increases are because we're trying to better communicate with the public the work the UK government is doing in Scotland, which is part of strengthening the union, and we feel that's very important. And all I would say in respect of, although we're spending £678,000, it's still considerably less.
More than that. Sorry, it's actually 819,640 was the
Okay,
figure quoted to me
that's
in
staffing
1819.
costs included, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to
That-
clarify this figure?
That's
Well,
adding
that was
into-
the answer I received from the former Secretary
Okay,
of State.
and all I would say is that the Scottish Government spends more, it's a fraction of what they're spending, and we completely understand why they would want to spend that money. I have no criticism of that, but I think equally it should be respected that we want to spend that money to get our message across.
I see. Are you equating a department with a government and all the responsibilities that go with that?
I'm equating the United Kingdom's government work and good work and efforts in Scotland, yes.
Okay, I have to say there are a number of people who are rather concerned by that spend. I wonder, can
Could
I...
I clarify the figures? For the,
Yes,
the
please.
record? So
Because those
the
are the ones
figures
we
are that-
received.
for the figure of 819,640 is the spend for the overall communications staff in the office.
That's right, yes.
The amount that we've spent on digital is in 2018-19 is £58,045. And that
Thank
has
you.
gone up since previous years. I think that
has.
reflects the fact that we're using it more. And we are pushing out messages, public information messages on a variety of issues that are important to people in Scotland, like
Thank you, Ms.
pensions,
McGregor.
EU exit. So there's a whole range of messages across the whole of the UK government.
So that increase to 819,000 represents another member or two of staff, perhaps, that's been taken on.
Well,
But can I get actually...
Can I go back? So I gave you a figure, and it's only my eyesight failing that is the problem here. But I said 678,000 was actually was the Scottish Government's spend in 2017-2018. Our spend was just shy of 25,000, and that's why I said it was a fraction of the amount.
Again, I would argue that a government has a rather more serious role to play with getting out
And I would argue that this
messages
is
of
the United
sort.
Kingdom government.
But I wonder, can I ask just about micro-targeting of social media ads? Because this was something also that I was asking questions around. I discovered that the Scotland Office is micro-targeting social media ads at specific demographics and social groups. And the Scotland Office has come under quite a lot of criticism for political bias as a result. Is the Scotland Office still doing that micro-targeting?
Well, we don't accept that argument.
Are you still doing micro-targeting?
I mean, I don't accept that we're being political in any way. The Scotland Office is acting strictly within the civil service rules.
Okay, thank you. And just lastly, I think at this point, can I ask why the Scotland Office spends a significant amount on social media, as Ms McGregor just acknowledged, and the Welsh Office spends nothing?
No less ambitious than us for the union, obviously. We take it very seriously, and we want to promote the good work that we do. And, there's a lot of things that whether it's Type 31 frigates and Rosyth, £211 million for Scottish farmers, the COP26 coming to Glasgow. We want people to know about the good things that this government is doing for the United Kingdom.
Sorry,
and for
Secretary of
Scotland.
State, you're seriously saying that the Secretary of State for Wales is less ambitious for his area
No,
than you are?
that was a flippant remark. I won't take it too seriously. But as to what he does and how he chooses to do it, that's a matter for him. All I'm saying is we take it very seriously promoting the United Kingdom government in Scotland.
Okay,
In
well, I
fact,
wonder...
the digital team recently visited the Northern Ireland office to share information about how we're doing digital work.
I remember
So
you said that, yes. Yes, that's terrific. But just one last
One
question,
last
please, very quickly. Can I ask then, Secretary of State for Scotland, so everyone can be certain that they are getting the best value, the taxpayer is getting the best value from your activities in this area, would you publish the scoring and evaluation of your department's social media advertising campaigns as other departments such as the Communities and Local Government Department have done?
Well, we're regularly evaluating the
sure, yes.
outcome. I mean, we can certainly look into that, but as you'll appreciate, this is information that's going out to very, very wide audiences. And,
Yes.
the part of the evaluation is people look, the amount of coverage we get, the number of hits that we get on our messages, and bear in mind these are important public relations and information messages are very high. So we consider that people are interested in what we're having to tell, what we're
So
telling
if they're
them.
so impressive, I wonder then, could you commit to publishing them?
We could certainly look at that. I'll speak to the team about that and we'll
That'd be
come back
grateful.
to you on that.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Paul Masterton.
I welcome the Scotland Office, who's rapidly increasing the promotion of the work that the UK government is doing for Scotland. The UK government is completely legitimate in its role as one of Scotland's two governments, and it is absolutely right that it promotes its work. But during the Conservative Leadership Campaign Secretary of State, you'll remember the now Prime Minister made commitments in relation to the setting up of effectively a unit within Downing Street that would try to look more closely at a cross-governmental level how policies that were introduced would interact with asymmetrical differences in the devolution system. Are you able to give an update in terms of that unit having been set up and how your early interactions as a department have worked with that unit?
So the unit for the Union you're referring to, which has been set up, the Prime Minister has styled himself Minister for the Union, and he's absolutely committed to the Union, as you know, and that's why he's created this team of officials. Their job is to work across government, and that includes the Scotland Office, and they want to stress test all policies against the devolved settlement. I mean, and also they want to make sure that the good work that's been done, the policies that have been done that will affect Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales. It is a unit for the Union, it's not a unit for promoting Scotland in the Union. We have to be clear about that. They want to make sure that the full benefit of that is reached by those parts of the United Kingdom that are benefiting. That said, my department still remains a key factor for government departments in Whitehall when they want to discuss things that are in Scotland's interests or how their policies might affect the devolved settlement. They will speak to the Scottish Government and they will speak to our officials, and very often our officials are working with Scottish Government officials. That's one of the things I've found to be a particularly smooth part of the machine is civil service engagement between the Scottish Government and Whitehall Government. So that's only backing up the Unit for the Union, but the Unit for the Union is trying to pick up and make sure no balls are dropped, in short.
If I can just add to that, I mean, I think I've met with the Number 10 Union Unit to discuss sort of matters of departmental policy, both to the Scotland Office and the Northern Ireland Office, and I think in both contexts, a lot of what they're doing is increasing our reach across government when it comes to magnifying some of the messages that we would be sending anyway as a territorial office, and making sure that those are taken up to the top level. So I think it's very complementary to the role of the Scotland Office and its ministers. And one example of that would be on the whole conversation about UK Share Prosperity Fund and the way in which that's developing. I think the Union Unit is listening carefully to what we have to say, and that is actually very much something which I think is complementary to what the devolved administrations themselves are saying about the importance of the UK Share Prosperity Fund reaching every part of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. We were going to come on to IGS, but did you want a quick one, Hugh, just on this?
Quick one on this. Just how often are you meeting each other? How often is each government meeting? Is it a weekly event? Is it a monthly event?
Well, it's so last week it was 3 times. But it is absolutely monthly. It's not every week, but the communication would be weekly, either through the EXO committee, or other forums that are available, or through JMCs. But there is a lot of contact, and there's probably more contact. I mean, at official level, if I could say,
that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I can pass.
Well, at official level, I would say the interaction is practically daily. I would certainly speak to my colleagues in the Scottish Government at least once a week, sometimes more. And there are other meetings ongoing on things like frameworks and legislation that are just ongoing. So it's part of our fabric to be talking to the Scottish Government colleagues all the time.
Thank you. Tommy Shepherd.
Good afternoon and welcome. I want to go back to the matter of intergovernmental relations, which has exercised this committee quite a lot over the last 18 months, and you may be familiar with our discussions and report. Can you tell us, the Cabinet Office is currently undertaking a review. Has there been any progress beyond the adoption of the high-level principles in July, and what is the role of your department in that review?
So we had I had a meeting, a quad meeting effectively. The 4 nations met with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster the week before last, possibly last week. It all becomes a bit of a blur these days, but very recently. And we were discussing progress on that. I think substantive progress has been made since July, certainly at official level. We have discussed it twice at JMCs, it's been raised, and the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have confirmed that they intend to bring forward a package of proposals before the end of this year.
Before Christmas?
Before the end of 2019, they're developing a package of reforms. Yeah.
Okay, that will be published.
Well, my understanding is that those proposals will be brought back to all their proposals will be brought back to all administrations before the end of this year. It's an all administration, process.
Okay. Well, we wait to see that with interest. I wonder,
I'm glad I've cheered you up with some news.
In terms of one specific that they may be looking at, we've previously expressed concern about arbitration when there's a difference of opinion. And argued for the need for a third-party arbitration process, something which your predecessor, he didn't commit to, but he said he would have a look at it. I'm wondering if you've got a perspective on that and whether or not that is going to be something that the review is likely to report upon.
Yes, okay, so I think the new dispute resolution process is something that's quite high on the agenda now, and I would say that before I come to answer the last part of your question, the disputes between governments are rare. We should put that on the record. I think in 20 years of devolution, there have only been 4 disputes of any significance between administrations. And obviously our prime focus is to avoid disputes between all administrations. But as regards the introduction of an independent or a third-party involvement in that process, we are proposing. Our current plans are to propose that should be the case.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting, and we'll very much look forward. That's speedy progress from
we're not
the
hanging
agreement
around
at
here.
high principles to actually having a paper out. So I'm pretty certain this committee will be very interested to see that once it's actually going to be published.
Minister Smith told me at her last meeting before she moved on that it would be there was no timetable or deadline that she was working to. So that's
there we go. Speedy progress indeed. Speedy Jack will call you, I think.
Union Jack, I prefer, but we'll stick with
there are lots of things there. Well, maybe, did you want to just on this one?
Yes. Very quickly, one of the things that your predecessor used to say that he used to find in private, that actually intergovernmental relations were very, very strong. But then, obviously, often after these meetings, individuals would then leave to present their political spin on the meeting. I just wondered if you find that actually day-to-day your working relations are very good.
Well, actually, I have to say you do raise a very good point. So my experience in discussions with, for instance, the Scottish Government in the EXO cabinet committees, which we won't go into the detail of them, but I have found myself to be on the same page as them on pretty much everything. And I found them to be very focused on the right things. I found the Scottish Government to be very helpful and caring about the right things for Scotland. I would be wrong of me to say otherwise. That's absolutely the case. And in the JMCs, I did comment after one of the JMCs to Mike Russell that we agreed on rather too much, and he said that makes me somewhat nervous. but on the things that matter, the substantive issues for Scotland, we were absolutely on the same page. Now, we do come out and tear strips off each other, and that's, to me, disappointing, but I'll be honest with you, we both do it, so it'd be wrong of me to say it's a one-way traffic, but it seems to be the nature of politics that we have to be adversarial, and for the simple reason that the Scottish Government have one major difference with the UK Government, and that is that they want to separate Scotland away from the United Kingdom, and we want it to stay part of the United Kingdom, and on that we disagree, and therefore inevitably we come out in public and say those things. But behind closed doors, I've found the people I've engaged with to date to be perfectly reasonable, and actually I haven't had any arguments with any of them.
If I could just add very briefly on that, just in my experience of attending 3 years of JMCs and ministerial fora between the different administrations, there have been times at which personalities have clashed, and there have been times at which the political differences between us have come to the fore. But actually there has been a constructive underlying relationship throughout, and I think particularly the ministerial forum was a very good example of where actually the politics was able to be put very much to one side, and we were able to work very constructively and along very sensible lines with different devolved administrations with completely different political objectives, but recognising that there was important work to be done. So I do think that sometimes that contrast between what happens in the room and some of the public perception on the outside is quite stark.
Thank you. After that loving, maybe we get to a place where there's the potential and possibility of disagreement and dispute, which is the case of Brexit, and John Marnock will lead off on that. John.
Thank you, Chairman. So the government's working very hard to secure a Brexit deal, and I just wondered if you could outline the advantages to Scotland of ensuring that the UK leaves with a deal as opposed to not securing a deal.
I think the advantages to Scotland of the UK leaving with a deal as opposed to not securing a deal are the same as the advantages to the whole of the United Kingdom. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that we should be endeavouring, as we have been certainly since I joined the Cabinet. All Cabinet meetings are focused very much on getting a deal and delivering a deal for the whole of the United Kingdom. And each part of the United Kingdom has concerns. I mean, we know what they are. In Scotland, we've recognised them. We're in agreement with the Scottish Government on them, and we are focusing on mitigating them, whether it's around sheep meat or shellfish, live shellfish crossing the short straits, and we are coming up with solutions to those problems, in terms of mitigation. But I would only finish by saying that leaving with a deal will be infinitely better than leaving without a deal. I've never denied that, but leaving without a deal won't necessarily be the disaster scenario that many people say it will be. And for the simple reason, and I'll justify that point, is because there have been over 60 EXO meetings, and over the last 3 months we've really focused hard on looking at those risks, and we have, I think, mitigated a lot of them. We're down to very much to a small percentage now of issues not dealt with and focused on. And so our risks day by day, this committee is chaired by Michael Gove quite brilliantly, and day by day there is no doubt in my mind that those risks are reducing all the time. And we should prepare for no deal, because we could, Article 50 usurps the Benn Act to ask for an extension, and we can ask for an extension if it comes to that. That's what the law says. But under Article 50, one of our European partners could very well use their veto, and we would find ourselves leaving on the 31st of October, and to not have prepared to the extent we have would have been utterly irresponsible.
So for those MPs who express a concern around no deal, do you agree with me the best way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to support a deal? I think you've hit the nail right on the head. The best way, if a deal comes forward, we're not there yet, but if a deal comes forward, the best way to avoid no deal is to support a deal. Yeah. There is no question about that, because if you don't support a deal, the risks still remain that no deal could be thrust upon us. Even if we've asked for an extension, we could still find ourselves in no deal territory. And clearly we don't know the detail of any deal yet, but there is speculation there might be some sort of different arrangement between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK in particular. I guess I'd like to know how that might impact on Scottish business, and whether the government's done any assessment on that, or whether there's any support available for Scottish businesses to manage that, if indeed that becomes a reality.
So the detail is not available on that yet, but the assurances I have sought is that Northern Ireland will remain in the UK Customs Union and therefore able to engage in UK trade deals. And I think that's very important. I'm also very keen to see us out of the Common Fisheries Policy in December 2020, and I've made that point very strongly, because I think there's a huge benefit for Scotland with rebuilding our coastal communities and increasing the fishing industry. And as to the more detailed parts of what you're asking, I simply don't know the answer, I'm afraid. The devil will be in the detail, and the detail is still being discussed.
I was quite surprised you repeated this comment, which I've got noted down here, which says that it wouldn't be seriously damaging if we leave with a no deal if we did it properly. That sounds entirely complacent, if you don't mind me saying.
Well, I would
just let me
agree.
finish, because what we know is that this will impact disastrously with serious consequences in every constituent that we serve around this table. There will be a consequence. In fact, a figure of £2,300 per person per year, with £12.7 billion taken out of the Scottish economy, and you're saying it's all right, don't worry about it.
Well, there are many predictions being made around this, both good and bad. And what I learned in the Treasury Select Committee was the one thing that you could predict with great certainty is the unreliability of predictions. And that
So
was
how
made.
mu-
I'm just being clear about this, Chairman. We are. What I'm saying is, in the event, it was a democratic mandate, the largest ever to leave the EU. We're trying to deliver on that. We are mitigating for the risks in front of us, so that we reduce those predictions that were made some time ago would not stand up today, because on a whole raft of things, medicines and on it goes. I mean, I'm not going to bore you with the detail, but we have got solutions and fail-safe solutions in place.
Have you got figures about how much this will economically impact on Scotland?
If you could explain to me how that economic impact is going to happen, because if it's migration and industries, the indefinite, there'll be 3 years of leave to remain for even in a no-deal Brexit for members of the EU still to come to the UK. So it's not like we're going to suddenly see, while we put a new migration policy in place, we're going to suddenly see a collapse in our food processing industries or something else. All of those things which have been predicted, but with the arrangements that now have been put in place, those things will not come to pass.
Okay, we'll come into that further in detail. I know Jed Killen wants to comment, and then Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. If we could just, for one moment, leave to the side the economic consequences potentially of a no-deal Brexit and focus on the political consequences. You said earlier in your remarks that the Prime Minister is committed to the Union. You called yourself Union Jack.
Yeah.
Given Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, how good politically is it for the Union if we leave the EU without a deal?
So, if we leave the EU without a deal, we have to have prepared for those things, and we have to make sure that the economic impact is reduced as much as we can. I've said in the past there will be bumps in the road. I recognise that. But we have to also look upon what we can achieve. If we leave the EU without a deal, once we get things settled down, and they'll settle down very quickly, business always finds a way through. It's not going to be the case that people aren't going to run their ferries, because ferries are leased and have to be paid for, therefore you run them. It's not that hauliers are going to stop running the trucks. Trucks are leased or financed and have to be paid for. So the wheels of industry and commerce will carry on turning. And
well, forgive me, I'm not talking about the economic impact. I'm talking about the potential political impact.
Well, so the political,
are you saying that you don't think a no-deal Brexit is a gift to the Scottish National Party?
I think that a no-deal Brexit, if the economy carries on to prosper, if we take control of our fisheries and our fishing waters, we're not going to, if the Scottish National Party want to leave the UK, which is worth more than 3 times in terms of trade and jobs to Scotland than being a member of the EU. If they want to do that, that'll be a difficult argument to sell. If they want to leave the UK to join the EU and join the euro, I say to people, don't take your pension and your wages in euros. Remain with the pound. I think you'll be better off. We've already had the First Minister say that there's a risk of a hard border. Well, I think that would be a very difficult thing to get round. It's entirely different situation to Northern Ireland. I think the strength of our fisheries and the idea we'd go back into the EU and give them back our fishing waters, I think that will be a hard sell as well. So I think that once we get over the initial shock of leaving, we would then start to sell the benefits of remaining in the United Kingdom.
Okay. Right. Hugh.
Yeah. If you talk about a no deal, your PM wants to shift the UK away from the EU standards on workers' rights and health and safety. Have you spoken to the STUC or any trade union?
So I don't agree with that. I don't agree that he wants to move any of those standards lower. In the conversations I've had with the PM, he talks about equivalence, which is the equivalent standards are higher standards, not reducing standards. Same with animal welfare and many other things. We want to be equivalent or higher than the standards in.
But has there been any discussions with STUC or any trade union?
Not that I've had, no. As to other parts of government, I don't know, but I certainly haven't had any.
Okay, we're still on no deal and the voting thereof for it or not. Ross Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. And welcome, Secretary of State.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. You said at the beginning in your opening remarks that there had been collaboration between your department and the Scottish Government. Can you just talk us through about some of the work that you're doing with the Scottish Government round about no deal prep? You've obviously talked a lot about what you are doing, the XO committees, all the preparations, just what work you're doing with the Scottish Government to ensure that Scotland itself is prepared if you find yourself doing it.
So, the work with the Scottish Government is going on at official level and obviously at ministerial level, and the Scottish Government are engaged in XO cabinet meetings. We are focusing on the areas we've identified under Yellowhammer as areas of risk, and we are working perfectly well through those. I mean, if you want to, I think there's only one area that's been raised that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster raised as a concern last week, and that was around the no-deal prep money, how much of it was being spent with local authorities for environmental health officers, which extra ones would be needed in the event of a no-deal Brexit to produce environmental health certificates for fish and other seafood products. And that's something that needs a bit of attention, but in the main, whether it's extra vehicle capacity at Stranraer for Cairnryan Ferry or the discussions around the sheep meat industry or other things, we have we are in agreement and plans are basically in place.
And just to add that official level, there are lots of regular meetings with the Scottish Government to just make sure we have a shared understanding of what the particular interdependencies are with Scotland. And I think that, again, that's probably an area where the Scotland office is able to add value, because we can provide the links between the Scottish Government and Whitehall departments where those don't exist already, to talk those things through. And the Scottish Government are also hardwired into the Yellowhammer apparatus as well, as are the other, as the Welsh Government are as well.
And a lot of money has been made available, I mean, to the Scottish Government, and more money has been made available actually this week.
On that particular point, and you raise it just in your answer, around about the money that's been made available. I know it was reported back in July that out of the 37.3 million that the Scottish Government had received for no-deal preparations, 10 million of that actually went into departmental spend. I think 4 million of that alone went into the Environment and Climate Change Department. What can you do, or do you think there's a role whereby we can ensure that, as much as that is a decision for the Scottish Government to take, and politically they may not want to be in a no-deal situation, but as you said yourself, it's prudent to prepare for any eventuality. Is there anything that you could do to engage with ministers to ensure that that money is getting spent where it should be, to ensure that industries are prepared for a no-deal should that happen, that jobs are protected should that happen?
The answer to that is no. So the 138 million that has been the Barnetised money, it's entirely up to the Scottish Government how they spend that. However, the Operational Contingency Fund, which is another 20.2 million this week, that money is ring-fenced for specific no-deal scenarios and to mitigate those.
Do you think the Scottish Government have done enough to prepare for a no-deal?
Well, I think they've done an awful lot to prepare for a no-deal. However, I think there are a few areas of concern. I mentioned one a moment ago in environmental health officers, and I think more could be done around that. It needs to be done around that area if we move towards no-deal. But I would go back to the points I made earlier to the committee, which is in the XO meetings we've had and other meetings, we have been minister to minister agreeing on what the issues are and how best to tackle them. As to whether or not we've got enough environmental health officers in place and how that's pared down through the system, that's a separate matter. And that is, as I say, that is a concern for the Chancellor of Duchy and concern for me. But there is no doubt that that the Scottish Government ministers understand where the risks are, and we agree where the risks are, and they are working towards improving.
On the money to local authorities, I think it was reported the other week, it was about £50,000 that's gone out to local authorities across Scotland. I know Aberdeen City, for example, and Aberdeenshire have asked for money.
Well, this is the point I'm talking about.
Would you be willing to engage with local authorities yourself if they feel that they're not getting anywhere else?
Well, I don't think under the devolved, unless someone wants to correct me, but I think under the devolved settlement we simply can't. I mean, we have to respect it at all points. I mean, part of my role as Secretary of State is to be a custodian of the devolved settlement. And we're not going to run a coach and horses through it. We just simply can't do that. We can raise issues where we're concerned about them, but we mustn't, cross the line.
Okay, right. We've got a number of people who have supplementaries, and we'll get to you, John. But Deidre's been waiting patiently.
Yeah, thank you. Just about the mitigating actions being taken, Secretary of State, the head of Scotland Food and Drink. Firstly, I should say the EU clearly agreed listed status for animal products a day or two ago, which is certainly good news. But in terms of the mitigating actions that you are looking at the moment, the head of Scotland Food and Drink warned that the health certificates for animal products would immediately rise from 15,000 per annum to 100,000 per annum after a no-deal Brexit, and that the system to certify Scotland's food exports would collapse. One of the reasons, big reasons being they just simply don't have the vets on the ground. And seafood and red meat, particularly venison, would be most affected. Could you tell us about, I mean, I realise he's one of those experts that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster has been so scathing about in the past, but could you give us some response to his views there?
This is the point I've just raised with Mr Thompson. I mean, it's very straightforward. The area where we're concerned is on EHOs. And that we think if there is well, we know that there is a weakness in the whole system, and the weakness is around that. And a lot of money was made available, 138 million for Brexit preparedness, and we feel that not enough money has gone paid through to local authorities to prepare for this eventuality. And it's not one that
kind of avoiding
I've known
the issue
about
that
this.
a vet takes
I have
around
known
7
about this for
years
3
to
months
train?
now. Since I came into the job, this is one of the things that was highlighted to me. But there is a risk there. I've highlighted the fact that there is a risk there, and it's something that needs to be addressed with some urgency.
I'm just wondering how 138 million compares to the 12.7 billion that might be the impact of Brexit. I mean, it's nothing really, is it?
Well, I'm not sure what your point is.
I'm just saying, as calculated, the economic cost of a no-deal Brexit to the Scottish economy could be £12.7 billion. That's what
Some
I'm getting
people
at.
have calculated there could be a benefit through taking control of our fisheries back to the Scottish economy. I mean, there are predictions. I've seen good predictions and bad predictions, but the 138 million, Chairman, is entirely to mitigate the cost to the Scottish Government of preparing for a no-deal Brexit.
Okay. Hugh Gaffney.
I've asked the Government for a written question about the impact of no-deal Brexit and food poverty levels in the UK. To date, I've not received any reply, which suggests the Government hasn't got a clear indication. So have the Government undertaken an impact assessment on a no-deal Brexit for food poverty levels in Scotland, or are we just going to get fed fish?
No, so the tariff schedule that has been set is to ensure, and if you look at it in some detail you will see, is to ensure that the cost of food does not rise. In fact, in some cases the cost of food should come down. But it's absolutely about not increasing the cost of food. And I would advise you to look at that tariff schedule that was produced, the day one tariffs. It's quite clear that is entirely structured to protect the consumer.
I'll resend the letter and maybe get a reply as well.
Did you send the letter to me?
No, it wasn't. It was sent to the Government, so I'll send it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. John Lamont.
Thank you. Just
follow up on the amount of resource that's been made available to the Scottish Government to prepare for Brexit. Some estimates suggest 100 million has been handed to the Scottish Government through Barnett, and maybe only 2 million of that has actually reached local authorities.
I think 130. I can say that 138 million has been handed under the Barnett formula, and another 20.2 million under the Operational Contingency Fund.
And how much of that do you think has actually reached Scottish councils to help prepare? I mean, obviously the councils are involved in the front line.
Well, our understanding, and it's very hard for us to wade in on the numbers, they don't have to give us the numbers, but certainly from what local authorities are suggesting and COSLA is suggesting, not very much of it.
So that means, just so I'm clear in my head, and forgive me if this is a naughty question, there's money that's been handed to the Scottish Government to help Scotland prepare for Brexit, which the Scottish Government's decided to retain for other purposes.
That some people are certainly saying that, yes.
Thank you.
Could I just ask, now we have got a little bit more time before you have to go, just about the Shared Prosperity Fund, what progress has been made and when we're likely to see the conclusion of the proposals? When is it going to be published?
I think, to be absolutely honest, I would rather we had more detail about that at this stage. It's still internal work going on in government. It's something on which we have been pushing hard. And as far as I understand, and certainly from the conversations we had last week at JMCE, I think that our asks are rather similar to the Scottish Government's in this respect. But it is a process which is being led by the Department for Communities and Local Government. And obviously we'll need Treasury input. So I think we're waiting for the outcome of that process.
So you can't tell us when we could expect to see this at all? And
I can't, but I think we're expecting something towards the end of the year. But as I say, I would personally be keen to see it even sooner.
Good. And I think.
So I might just add to that, Chairman. Sorry, that it is a serious work stream for us, and we want to get our heads around the numbers behind it, if that makes sense as well, because it is, if you like, something that's coming out of EU funding arrangements for the UK, and there is an impact on the 4 parts of the UK for this, and we want to make sure Scotland is getting her fair share.
There was conversation, I think it was around about August, that the UK government would have a bigger say in how money is spent across Scotland. Is that still the plan of the government to get involved in areas of devolved spending?
So it was mentioned in the Queen's speech about sort of large infrastructure projects across the UK and spending in that regard. But as regards the spending of the Shared Prosperity Fund, it's absolutely the case that the UK government wants to work in collaboration with the Scottish government on that. And we will respect, let's be clear, we will respect the devolved...
So how does that then work? Could you give us an example of the type of spend that you have in mind, if it is to be across devolved areas but not impacting on the responsibilities of the Scottish government? So
until we have the two things, until we have the legislation for the Shared Prosperity Fund and we know what the parameters are, I think we should discuss that at a future meeting, because it's as I say, it's still work in progress.
But what I would say is there is a good example of the UK government investing alongside the Scottish government in the city and growth deals, and that shows that you can invest with both governments taking responsibility for the areas for which they're responsible. And so that perhaps sets a useful precedent which could allow both governments to be playing a role in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund as we move forward.
But with all due respect, that's an agreed position by both governments. This seems to be an imposition by UK government to interest itself in areas of devolved spending.
I wouldn't go onto that territory just yet. I mean, we need to see the devil's in the detail, and the detail's still being debated.
I think we need to have a proper conversation about these issues, because it does seem to be not particularly well thought out. We don't know when it's going to be published, and we don't know how it's going to impact on Scottish spending. So I think we need to revisit this at some point.
And what I'd say is, if we move hopefully to a deal this week that everyone can support, and then we move into an implementation period before we leave the EU, we have time enough to address this matter.
Okay. Paul Messerton.
Yes, just a quick one. I certainly, and I know others, have a concern that the Shared Prosperity Fund does end up basically becoming an England-only fund, and then Barnettised, but it seems to me part of the responsibility of the Shared Prosperity Fund should be to look at some UK-wide strategic investments that either through agreement touch into devolved areas but are funded from the UK government centrally, or are within reserved areas but have a UK-wide context. So I suppose I appreciate what you're saying is it's not been finished being designed, but can I just stress that I would not want to see an England-only fund, because that would seem to be a big wasted opportunity to tackle some really big UK-wide strategic important projects.
So, and that's why I refer to the infrastructure projects in the Queen's speech. And I mean, I agree with you on that, but and I think many others would as well. I mean, it is important that the benefit from this Prosperity Fund goes across the whole of the United Kingdom, and there's many ways that can happen. But as I say, we're slightly getting the cart before the horse, because it's the new government, the government that came in July is sort of revisiting it and looking at how best it can be used to benefit the whole of the United Kingdom.
And I mean, just to add that, I totally agree with you. It couldn't possibly be an England-only fund. It would be absolutely wrong for it to be. But actually, if you look at the impact of EU structural funds across the different parts of the Union today, it's very clear that whatever replaces them will need to invest across those different parts of the Union to a significant degree. So I don't think there's any question of it being an England-only fund. And that certainly is something that we would be pushing very strongly against if that were. But it's not something I've ever heard suggested.
Just lastly, to finish on probably a more consensual note, and that's the success of the city, region and growth deals. I think we're all agreed that they've been fantastic. I think all looking around the table, like all of us are covered by some sort of deal in some area, but there is a commitment now for the whole of Scotland to be covered by one of these growth deals. Could you maybe give us a sense of the time frame for agreeing deals in the areas that are not currently covered?
So yes, I mean, I agree with you. It's been a tremendous. I mean, I pay credit to my predecessor and to the Scottish Government on this, and to local authorities in Scotland. And I would answer your question by saying that I recently announced £25 million for Argyll and Bute, and that leaves only two areas now, and that's the Islands and Falkirk. And we are very close to agreeing with the Treasury those funds, and I would expect the announcement to come again, rather like the one that I gave to Mr. Shepherd earlier. I expect this announcement to come certainly before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year,
yes.
I know you have to go set to state.
Yes.
Unless there's any final questions from anybody on growth deals as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Quick one.
Yep.
I've got a Scottish crime campus in my constituency in Carcosh. How would a no-deal Brexit impact upon the policing capabilities? In other words, Europol, the European arrest warrant, how will all that stuff will it still be there, available?
So we will still, I mean, the plan is still to share data on crime. Yes. When, I am going to go to Cabinet, so I'm going to hand over to Minister Walker, if that's okay.
I just say, first of all, Secretary, thank you ever so much for your first meeting with the Scottish Affairs Committee. We look forward to many more with you. Thank you.
Can I just say that it was much more pleasant experience than I expected?
Well, they're always pleasant in the Scottish Affairs Committee. And perhaps if Mr Walker and Mr McGregor stays, I know there's a couple of questions.
Sure. I mean, I just on the issue of policing, I think it's clear that a deal where we had fuel security cooperation is clearly better for all the police forces than a no-deal scenario. So that's the first thing I'd say. But of course, there are contingency plans and fallback options available for police forces. Those have been discussed at EXO. I can't go into all the full detail of that, but it is certainly something that I know the Scottish Government has been engaged in that conversation, and it's something that we've also discussed at JMCEN with them.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions in relation to the letter you sent in response to the questions I asked Ms McGregor about FOI requests, freedom of information requests, and the transfer of records. I just wondered, you say in your letter that you conclude you don't have the resources to routinely publish online responses to FI requests. Mm-hmm. And of course, before August 2014, I think it's the case that you did. I'm just wondering why you couldn't use some of those extra com staff to dig around and find a few questions and answers and then publish them on your website.
So what we've concluded is that it's not cost effective to be publishing. Now, this mustn't be confused with us answering our FOI.
No, I'm not confused at all.
We have a
very
good record on that. In fact, we're one of the best in government for answering our FOIs, which is good. In terms of publishing them, we have agreed, and I said in the letter, that where we have an FOI, which we think there's a wider public interest, we will publish them. A lot of our FOIs are FOIs that have gone to lots and lots of different departments. They quite often cover things that are already in the public domain, things like ministerial salaries. So, you know, we're not sure the extra advantage of publishing those, and things like, you know, how much we've spent on Christmas decorations and things like that, which may not be in the wider, you know, the wider public interest. I
just don't see that, given the taxpayer is paying for your department, why do you get to decide what is a matter of wider public interest, or the Secretary of State? I don't know who. I'm not sure of the sort of how this works, but it just seems strange to me that other departments can do this and not, and that your department used to do that before August 2014.
Well, the numbers of FOIs have increased.
Yes.
We're a very small department. We do. I should stress again that we do answer our information requests.
For me, that's not actually the issue. It's simply being transparent about the questions and the answers and publishing them so that everyone can see what is being asked.
It is important that all governments and government departments respond to FOIs within the legal framework. I think the Scottish Office's response rate is 98.5% within the 20-day target.
Issue.
That compares to the First Minister of Scotland's office as a 50% rate, which was recently criticised by the Information Commissioner's office. So I think that is an issue, and I do think it's important that actually our department is one of the top performing departments in Whitehall when it comes to responding to FOIs. The nature of the publication of that has to be an internal decision which is reflected in the law.
Okay, well, we'll see what the taxpayers say about that. Can I just ask just a simple question, actually, Ms McGregor? You say the Scotland Office isn't covered by the Public Records Act 1958 and the subsequent legislation that regulates the management of records of UK government departments. Can you just explain why?
Well, we do comply with it, however. We're in very sort of close contact with the National Records for Scotland on our files.
Yeah,
so we do comply with the provisions of the.
But historically, what's the reason for it not being covered by that Act?
Sorry, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why we haven't been covered by it, but the fact is we're not, but we do comply with it. I think that probably...
Might it be possible for you to try and find out for the committee? I'd be very interested.
Certainly.
To know. Great, thank you.
Okay.
That goes back some years. So
no, I appreciate that, but it just seems odd.
We're going to have to wrap things up because we have to go to private session. I know Mr Lamont has to leave us soon, so we need to some business that we have to conclude. But can I thank you both very much for attending today? I think there was a couple of bits of information that was requested, which I'm sure you've taken a note of, Ms McGregor, and that will be supplied in good time to the committee. But thank you for your attendance today. Order, order.